Good afternoon. My name is Ram Prasad DS, Assistant Professor, Department of Civil Engineering, SDMIT Ujire. First of all, I wish to welcome all the aspirants of this DCET to this class. Today's session is all about project life cycle. Here, I'm going to discuss something about what is project, what is the life cycle of a project, what are the different phases of the project life cycle, and everything in detail. So first of all, we need to understand what is a life cycle. Right? So in general, if I'm discussing about life cycle, it is like from starting to end. Right? So anything from starting to end, we call it as a life cycle. Right? So it may be a life cycle of a material, or it may be a life cycle, whatever it is. So life cycle refers to starting to end. That is what we call it as a life cycle. Here, the context here is the project. Project life cycle means from starting to the end. What are the different stages involved in a project? The project, it may be anything. It may be a construction project, maybe an app development project, whatever it is. From starting to last, what are the different steps involved in the project? That is called as the project life cycle. Now, going through the definition, project life cycle is the sequence of phases through which a project progresses. You need to understand this. Project life cycle is a sequence. What are the different sequence through which the project progresses? This is called as the project life cycle. So now, with the help of this figure, you can see here, there are 5 stages of project life cycle. Starting from initiation, that is the first step. Second step here is planning. Third step is execution. Fourth step is monitoring. Fifth step is closure. All projects has this 5 stages. So the projects, it may be varying, as I told you earlier, it may be varying from the construction of a building, or it may be a construction of a road, or it may be a mobile app development, or it may be the manufacturing of a mobile itself. Right? So that also a project. It all has to start with the first phase of initiation. So initiation here is referring to the beginning or the starting point of the project. If I consider thinking of taking one project, say for example, I want to construct one road, right? So here the project is the construction of a road, right? So here from where I have to start this road construction, right? So from what I have to start, right? So you may be knowing that starting from scratch, right? So where it starts, right? So that is the point of initiation. That is the first phase of this project life cycle. And the second phase of the project life cycle is planning. This planning involves different stages. Again, organizing, right? So how to plan this, right? So planning itself is a very big topic. If you want to complete any project successfully, the planning should be sound. A sound planning will lead to the success. So here in planning, we are making different kind of strategies, right? So strategies means, right? So what happens if the things go wrong, right? So what we have to do, right? So we will be having multiple plans for achieving the goals, right? So in the planning stages, right, so it involves organizing the work, right? So organizing the work once again, right? So who has to do what, right? So who has to do what strategy we have to use, right? So when to deploy a particular strategy, right? So what if the things go wrong, right? So where we have to intervene, right? So everything should be in the planning, right? So this planning is required for achieving the goals or the particular outcomes what we are going to lay. So here, say for example, right? So if we are constructing a building, say for this context, I can take example of construction of building. So So building construction is our project, right? So in this, the planning it involves, right? So who has to take care of what? So who is going to manage the materials? Who is going to manage the machines? Who is going to manage the manpower? Right. So what are all the different strategies we have to use? Right. So to get the things done from the laborers. Right. So how to achieve the target dates? How to complete the project within the deadline? Right. So everything we need to plan, right? So here the outcomes refers to the completion of a project. For completing the project, what are all the steps we are taking, right? So if any hindrance comes, right, so how we are going to overcome this hindrances, right? So by deploying different strategies, right? So that will be in coming under this planning. And the third stage of this life cycle project is execution, right? So once we are ready with the plans, right, so usually we should not stick to one plan, right? So we should be having alternative plans. If we have one or more than one plans, it is always fine. So when it comes to the execution, right, so it is a process of implementing plans and taking actions to achieve objectives, right? So sorry, here our objective is the construction of a building for which we have already planned. Planning means, right, so who has to do what, right? So how to deploy the different strategies for achieving the different outcomes. This already we have laid a sound planning. So once the plan is ready, right, so we need to implement that planning. The implementation of a planning is called as the execution phase, right? So in execution, again, whatever we have planned, right? So we need to check whether it is happening properly or not, right? So execution here is a process of implementing the earlier developed plans and taking action to achieve the objectives. So before executing, we need to have a plan. Before planning, we need to have some objectives, right? So when I come to this context, here the objective is the construction of building. For the construction of building, we have prepared the planning, right? So once the plan is ready, we are now ready for the execution, right? So in this stage, we are doing the work as per our plans, and we are monitoring whether we are going in line with our plan or not, right? So this is the execution part. And the fourth stage here is the monitoring, right? So this is a very critical stage, right? So in this part, we are going to monitor, right? So what are all the different works which
Excuse me,
is
sir.
happening? Yes, sir. Yes.
Sir, you can take the cursor in the left side.
Left side.
Left side you
Sorry.
have the cursor point over. Sir, cursor point na move ಮಾಡಿ ಕೆಳಗಡೆ ಅಲ್ಲೊಂದು laser point, laser. Take the laser. The
This
third
one.
one from the
Yes.
left side, third one.
Left side.
Third one, sir. Third option. That one. Take. ಅದು click ಮಾಡಿ.
La-
ಮೇಲ್ಗಡೆ first one.
laser
First one.
point.
First one. First one.
Laser.
Yeah. Sir.
Yes.
Yeah, sir.
So now, yes,
You can
okay.
continue.
So the fourth stage here is the monitoring, which is considered as the crucial one. Why? Because whether the things are going right according to our plan or not, we will come to know only by monitoring the things. Say, for example, so now I have prepared one plan, right? So I have prepared one schedule. In that schedule, I'll be marking what are the target dates for the completion of the works. Again, I am going back to the same example, the construction of building. So here, I am planning to construct a three-story building. In that, so my plan is to complete one story in the first 2 months. So next two stories in the next 2 months, say for example, right? So first 2 months is for the construction of the first story, and the next 2 months is for the construction of the remaining two stories, right? So here in the monitoring, right? So I need to track whether I am going as per my plan, I am going as per my schedule. right? So this is done in the monitoring stage. And why it is considered as the very crucial stage here means, right? So the project failure or success is dependent on this monitoring, right? So if we fail to monitor what is the phase with which the project is happening, right? So that may take us into the losses, right? So that is why I told it as a very crucial stage in the project life cycle. And the last stage here is the closure, right? So this closure is handing over process. Say for example, right? So I have constructed the building, I need to hand it over to the clients, right? So this is called as the closure stage, right? So in this slide, I try to explain, right? So in brief, right? So what are the different stages of a project life cycle, right? So going back, right? So here, project life cycle is the sequence of phases through which a project progresses, right? So you need to remember here there are 5 stages of project life cycle. It starts from the initiation, then planning, then execution, then monitoring, and finally closure. These are the 5 stages of project life cycle, right? So now I'll be going in deep with these stages and what are all the different steps involved in these stages. So now the first step here is the initiation, right? So what are all the different things we have to do under this heading, right? So here we need to define the goals of a project, right? So why we are undertaking this project, right? So we need to define clearly what are all the goals of this project, right? So defining the goal refers to why we are taking up this project. Say for example, so again, I'll be going back to the same example, the construction of a building, right? So what is the goal of this, right? So here the goal is very simple, right? So constructing the building within the time, right? So that is my goal here, and creating the business keys, right? So here, very important thing here is the charter, right? So I will let you know this first, right? So complete the project charter, right? So I'll move back, moving to the next slide, right? So why I need to explain this charter first, right? So here, charter means, right? So the project charter is an important document consisting of details like the project constraints, goals, appointment of the project manager, budget, expected timeline, right? So this is an important document, I can say, right? So this is the important document which is consisting of all these datas. What are the constraints, what are the goals of a project, and appointment of a project manager, budget, expected timeline, right? So this is called as a project charter, right? So in the initiation stage, we need to prepare this complete project charter, right? So now I will you can just go through this, right? So this is a typical template of the project charter, right? So here we have different aspects. You can see here what is the title of a project, what is the project starting date, or what is the end date of a project, and who is the project manager and who is the sponsor, right? So likewise we have some other things here, right? So that is what is the scope of this project and what are the deliverables, right? So deliverables, once again, it is a topic. Deliverables means, say for example, if a industry is producing mobiles, deliverable here is a mobile. If an industry is producing software, deliverable is a software, right? So when it comes to the civil engineering industry, deliverable here is a building, right? So if our project is a building, right? So deliverable here is a building, right? So that is deliverables, right? So what are the deliverables here, right? So that is also we need to mention here. And what is the budget, right? So what is the budget and what is the milestone schedule, right? So milestone schedule means, right? So here we need to make what is the target complete date, right? So completion date when we are going to complete this project, and what is the starting days of our project and how we have scheduled this, right? So who is responsible for what, right? So what is the time which is required for the completion of the different stages of our project, right? So when we are filling all these data into this document, right? So this becomes the project charter, right? So project charter is a document which is consisting of all these data, right? So that is what we need to prepare in the initiation stage, right? So complete the project charter, right? So next is the listing of stakeholders, right? So stakeholders means the beneficiaries, right? So here you can see, right? So this also can be mentioned in this project templates, right? So deliverables, you can see here, who is the sponsor and what is the deliverable, right? So what is the cost of a project, that is a budget of a project, what is the milestone, right? So likewise we can add some more data here, right? So that is, right, so who is the beneficiary of this, right? So likewise we can add some more points here, right? So this becomes a project charter, right? So project charter, we need to prepare this in the initiation stage, right? So this will be serving as a very important document throughout the project progression, right? So that is what there in a initiation stages, right? So next comes the stage that is planning, right? So this planning is also considered as a very important phase in the project life cycle, right? That is improper planning which leads to the losses, right? So in civil industry, usually what happens is if we are running out of time, say for example, if we need to complete the time within 6 months, completion of a project within 6 months, right? So if we are dragging project for 8 to 9 months, right? So then obviously we are going to face some losses, right? So within the time we need to finish the project, or finishing the project within the time, right? So we need to have a sound planning, right? So here in the planning stages, right, so we need to define what is the scope of our project, right? So why we are doing this project, right? So who are all the beneficiaries, right? So everything is to be defined in this planning, right? So next, create a project plan. So again, when it comes to this project planning, right? So we need to concentrate on two important things, right? So one is the management, that is the three M's, right? So three M refers to machineries, manpower, right? So machineries, who need to take care of this machineries, right? So who is going to manage this, right? So next one is who is in charge of managing the manpower, right? So manpower, machineries, right? So management, manpower, manage, who is going to manage all these things, right? So that we need to decide at this stage, right? So when it comes to this construction industries, right? So improper utilization of materials, improper utilization of manpower, and improper utilization of this sorry, so improper utilization of three M's, right? So that is a manpower, machines, right? So machine, manpower, and so one more stage is there, wait a minute, right? So you can see here, right? So manpower, machine, and materials, sorry. So manpower, material, and machines, right? So improper utilization of manpower, materials, and machine will take into the losing state, right? So that is why we need to be very careful while planning, right? So even the material is to be planned, right? So manpower is also to be planned, right? So planning materials and manpower means, right, so for which work, right, so how many number of employees are to be employed, right? So how to manage the materials, right? So that is also coming under this planning, right? So next is set a budget baseline, right? So setting up of a budget baseline means, right, so what stage of a project, right, so what should be the consumption in terms of money. So that is what the budget baseline, right? So different stages of a project, right? So it will be consuming different amount of money, right? So which stage, right? So how much budget is to be released, right? So that is what the budget baseline, right? So that is also be in a planning stage, and defining the roles and responsibility, right? So as I told you, right, so who has to take care of what, right? So who has to take care of what, right? So this is assigning the roles for the different persons, right? So who has to take care, who has to be in charge of this work, right? So who has to be in charge of this work, right? So that is defining the roles and responsibilities for the employees, right? So this is also to be done in the planning stages, right? So this is what the second phase of the project life cycle. Next is the execution, right? So in execution phase, right, so the first step here is allocate project resources, right? So if I consider the construction industry, for example, in construction industries, right, so allocation of the resources means allocation of materials, allocation of manpower, and allocation of machines, right? So machinery, materials, and manpower, right? So this is to be allocated for the particular work, right? So usually what happens is, right, so if I consider any site, right, so different works will be going on simultaneously, right? So different works are going simultaneously. If we are not able to allocate the proper resources for the proper work, automatically we cannot be able to achieve success, right? So that is, we cannot be able to finish the project in time if we are not able to allocate the correct resources to the correct site. So we need to have a plan here, right? So how much manpower is required for a particular work, right? So accordingly, we need to divide the total manpower what we have, and we need to allocate this for the corresponding works, right? So that is what the allocation of the project resources. It includes the distribution of the labors, it includes the distribution of machineries, right? So likewise, right? So what are all the resources we have, we need to utilize it to the maximum extent, right? So that is what the allocation of project resources, right? So on the other hand, what I can say here is if some machines are not used, right, so automatically, right, so we will go the possibilities are very high that we will incur losses, right? So that is, it comes under the ineffective allocation of resources, right? So what is the machine, right? So what for it is being used, right? So what is the role at the present time, right? So if we are able to make this clear, right, so then we can achieve success in the projects, right? So that is proper allocation of the resources. It may be the manpower, it may be the machines, whatever it is, right? So if we are allocating it properly, then we can complete the work within the scheduled times, and we can achieve the success, right? So that is what the first point. And manage project resources, right? So allocation, the second point is managing, right? So we need to have a close eye on how the materials and the machines and this material machine are being used, right? So that is also we need to have a close look, right? So that is managing the project resources, again comes under this execution part, right? So next is the build the product or process, right? So building the product or process, right? So product means, right, so if it is a manufacturing industry, right, so there the project is manufacturing of goods, right? So if it is a construction industry, right, so it is a building of a building or anything, right? So the actual execution work here, right, so that is building a product or a process has to done. And meet often and fix issues as they rise. Usually what happens is, if it is any kind of industries, right, so some issues will come and it will be hindering the progress of a project, right? So usually in the civil industries what happens, there may be some random problems, right? So some accidents will take place, right? So when we are dealing with this machineries and all, usually the accidents will take place, and we need to fix these issues as early as possible, right? So that is also very important. And here there are some people, right, so they have to intervene for fixing these issues, right? So that is project manager, right? So sometimes they will be intervening for fixing the issues, right? So if at all it rises in the site, and some so many things will happen and it may hinder our work, right? So we need to fix all those issues, right, so to complete the project within the stipulated time. That is what this execution is all about. Next is the monitoring and control. And here The first point is take effort and cost, right? So we need to understand this carefully, right? So take effort and cost here refers to, right? So what is the efforts we are putting and what is the total cost we are putting and what is the output we are getting, right? So that is the take effort and cost, right? So how much effort we are putting and how much cost it is incurred and what is the progress still, right? So this has to match. Say for example, if 50% are working, right? So if 50% are working and we are spending so much of money on them, if there is no progress at all, right? So then, right, so this will not match, right? So that is effort, cost and progress will not match, right? So this has to match. If 50% are working, if we are incurring some money, right, so on them, right, so automatically there should be some progress, right? So what is the effort we are putting, what is the cost we are incurring and what is the progress, right? So that we need to have a check, right? So that is what the monitoring and control, the first step. And the second step here is monitor project progress, right? So usually in the planning stages we are going to prepare the schedules, right? So in that schedule, right, so different works and the time will be given, right? So in the first month we need to complete the basement work, in the second month we need to complete the walls, in the third month we need to complete all this plastering and all. Likewise we are going to schedule this project, right? So we need to have a close eye on the monitoring project progress, whether we are progressing within the planned phase or whether we are lagging or whether we are going in fast than what we have planned, right? So that is if we are able to achieve the progress in the second month, right, so that was to be achieved in the third month, right? So that is if we are going forward, right, so going forward, right, so that is we are going at a very fast phase, right? So that also is very important, right? So where we are exactly, we are aligned with our plan or not, right? So that is what we are going to do here. And ensure adherence, right? So adherence to the plan means we should not be able to deviate from the plan what we have done in the earlier stages, right? So usually what happens, right, so many circumstances will come and it will deviate us from the initial plan, right? So here always we need to stick with the plan whatever we have done in stages, right? So that is what this point is all about, that is ensuring adherence to the plan, right? So what is to be done, right? So when it is to be done, right? So usually this schedule we are going to prepare in the planning stages whether we are going with our plan or not, right? So this is we need to ensure whether we have stick to our plan or not. And the last one here is prevent any chances of disruption, right? So there should not be any disruptions from the plan what we have laid. Always we have to go with our plan, right? So we should not give any scope for disrupting from the plan what we have done, right? So that is also to be taken care under this heading, the monitoring and control, right? So why I told this monitoring and control is very important is, right, so this determines whether we will go into a profit or loss, right? So if I consider the first point, that is take effort and cost, right? So if there is no progress, right, so if there is no progress, only it is incurring some cost, automatically the chances are very high that the project will go into a loss, right? So here we can track what is actually happening, right? So we will come to know before the completion of a project itself, we will come to know whether this project is going to be a success or failure, or what are all the alternative steps we can take for bringing this project, right, so which is going under loss into a project, right? So all these rectification can also be done if the projects are monitored properly, right? So that is why this is considered as a very important stage in the project life cycle. And the next stage here is the completion. So in this completion stage, the first step is handover deliverables, right? So as I told you, if it is a mobile manufacturing company, deliverable is a mobile, right? So if it is a construction company, deliverable is a building, right? So likewise, different industries will be carrying out different projects and accordingly they will be having some deliverables, right? So next is review report deliverables, right? So we need to have a report, right, so on the project, right? So in the project report, right, so we need to enter, right, so what are all the different stages, or what are all the different things we have considered for the planning, right? So how the project actually went, right? So what are all the circumstances we have faced, and how we have managed to meet the schedule, and how we have delivered the project within the time, right? So all these things we need to enter in this review report, right? So it will be giving you some idea, right? So if you are carrying out next project, right, so this will be serving as a benchmark, right? So that is what the review project deliverables. And the next stage here is get project results approved, right? So here in a system, right, so say for example, if I'm a contractor, right? So if I am a contractor, right, so I have assigned with the construction of a building, right? So once the building is constructed, I need to hand it over to the client, right? So before handing it over, right, so there is some process of approving, right? So what are all the specifications he has specified at the initial stages, right? So whether I have done that or not, right? So it is to be checked, right? So here the client is going to check whether, right, so the specifications are met or not, right? So if it is not met, the project will not be considered as a successful one, and the project will not get completed if it is not approved, right? So we need to get approval for the results, right? So if the client says, right, so these are all the materials you have to use, or say for example, right, so if the client is giving some software company to develop some apps for the mobile, right? So once the app is developed, right, so here you need to check, right, so whether the app is working properly or not, right? So if the app is working perfectly, then it is to be approved. Otherwise, if the app is showing some errors or that kind of a things, automatically the project will not get completed. He will raise some issues, and after solving that issues, right, so it is to be approved, right? So that is what in every projects, right, so it is to be approved. Once it is working well, right, so then only it will get approved, right? So that is what also important stage. And next is the document project learnings, right? So here, this is very, very, very important for the project, right? So usually what happens, if we fail to document the things, whatever we have faced, right, automatically it will be causing the same kind of a things for the next project, right? So the learnings from the mistakes, whatever we have committed in the past, it will be serving as a guide in the future, right? So project documentation is very, very important. If the project goes into a loss, right, so we will be able to tell what is the reason for the incurring of a loss, right? So that we need to avoid in the coming projects, right? So project document is very, very important. What are all the learnings we have made, where we went wrong, all these things are to be entered here. This will be serving as a guide for the next upcoming projects, right? This is about this completion stage. These are the 5 stages in the project life cycle, right? So once again, I will go in brief about this. Project life cycle is the sequence of phases through which a project progresses. And there are 5 stages of project life cycle. It starts from the initiation stage, then planning, then execution, then monitoring, and closure or completion. Next, initiation, right? So these are all the steps we need to follow under this heading. You came to know what is project charter, right? So what are all the important details which is to be presented in the project charter, right? So the goals, appointment of project manager, budget, right? So expected timeline, right? So who is the client, who are the beneficiaries, all these data can be entered in the project charter. And planning, right? So these are all the different stages here, right? So defining the scope and creating the project plan, budget baseline, and assigning the roles and responsibilities for the employees. And these are the different steps in the execution stage of a project. And finally, this monitoring and control here, this is very, very crucial, right? So this determines whether the project will go into a loss or profit. Completion stage, these are all the things we need to make sure while completing the project, right? So this is a brief idea on this project life cycle, right? So now uh, this is the time for this quiz, right? So try to answer these questions, right? So whatever we have discussed in the today's session, right? So these questions are based on the today's discussion, right? So the question here is the project life cycle consists of dash number of
Five,
phases. Any answers?
five number of phases.
Five.
Yes, the options
Five.
here are
Five.
3, 4,
Five.
6, 5. Right, so
Five.
now the right
Five.
answer is 5. D, 5 number of phases. Right. So can you able to remember what are the 5 phases of this project life cycle?
Initiation, planning, execution, monitoring,
Yes. Yes.
Monitoring,
completion.
closure.
Yes, very good, very good. So these are the 5 stages of this project life cycle, or 5 phases, I can say 5 phases of this project life cycle. Next, the next question here is resources refers to what, right? So the options here are manpower, materials, machine,
All
and
of the above.
option D,
All of
all.
these.
All of these.
Yes, very good.
All of
All
these.
C. Option C.
Resources, yes, absolutely right. Resources here refers to all of this, right? So we call this as resources: manpower, machine, and materials. As I told you, this allocation of resources means, right? So how we are going to distribute this manpower, materials, and machine for a specified work, right? So if some work is going on, we need to calculate how much manpower is required, how much materials is required, whether the machine is required, if it is required, which kind of machine is required, right? So we cannot be uh, sending the same kind of a machine for all kind of works, right? So what machine suits what kind of a work, right? So we need to identify this, right? So this comes under the efficient management of the materials or the resources, I can say, right? So efficient management of resources, right? So now the answer here is all of this, right? So everyone has told this answer. Next question here is the project life cycle consists of understanding the scope of a project, formulation and planning various activity, objectives of a project, right? So next is all of this. What is the
All of
answer?
these.
All
All
of
of this.
Yes, very good. So here, when it comes to the project life cycle, right? So we need to understand what is the scope, right? So that is in the initial stages itself. In the initiation, we are going to define what is the scope of a project, and we are going to formulate some plans, right? So planning is the second stage, and objectives we need to write, right? So why we are carrying out this project, and therefore, obviously, the answer here is all of this. Next question here is the project life cycle is comprised of which of the following? Phases, estimates,
Phases.
milestone,
Phases. Yeah.
activity.
Phases.
Yes, what is the answer?
Phases.
Phases.
Phases. Very good. So the project life cycle is comprised of phases. How many number of phases it has?
5.
Five
five.
number.
Phases. Very good. Right. So project life cycle is comprised of 5 number of phases. Obviously, the answer here is phases. Next question. Dash is an important document consisting of details like the project constraints, goals, appointment of the project manager, budget, expected timeline. Right? So can anyone able to answer this without options?
Project charter.
Project charter, very, very good, right? So project charter, right? So now the options you can see here: charter, estimates, project report, and activity log, right? So you are able to answer this without options, right? So answer here is a project charter, right? So this is about the project life cycle, right? So I try to explain this in a simple way, right? So project life cycle is all about, the life cycle is a sequence of phases, right? So what are the phases and what is its sequence, right? So these are the phases and this is the sequence with which we are going to approach, right? So initiation, planning, execution, monitoring, and closure, right? So I hope you're able to understand this topic, right? So if you have any doubts regarding the today's session, you're feel free to ask. You can ask any doubts regarding the project life cycle. Any doubts in this? Please respond.
No, sir.
No, sir.
No, sir.
Yes, it is a very easy topic, a project life cycle. Life cycle, it means from starting to end. That's it, right? So where it has to start, where it has to end, in between, what are the different steps we need to carry out, right? So if you are clear with this topic, we will end this session here. If you have any doubts regarding this, please feel free to ask. I will try to clear all your doubts. Any doubts here? I hope everything is clear. We will be sharing this recorded video as well. Right, so please go through this. And if possible, I will be sharing some materials regarding this. And I'll be taking one more session on tomorrow. Right, so that will be, once again, it is a continuation of this project life cycle. We will try to learn some more things in the next session. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for attending this class. Right. So, and all the best for your DCET. Okay, thank you.